Cause everybody in the world.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you, if you wish to interact with the show more directly throughout its entirety, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact. You can do one of two things. Either press that $sign in the comments section, leave a tip or donation, or just leave any questions, comments, or concerns you have throughout the show, whether it be about any of my segments or just any questions in general, looking for some fantasy advice. I love hearing your guys' opinions. It makes the show that much better. But without further ado, let's jump into our second segment of the day, talking about my fantasy stars of the weekend in the NFL. Now, I could have picked a ton of different performances. There were a lot of good ones throughout the week. Certain positions kind of rising above others in certain areas. I feel like this week was hard to gauge as well, just because we know kind of where most of these positions stand and how we view certain players at each position, but I wanted to add a little bit more variety this week. I wanted to give respect to certain players at certain positions that might not be getting it enough, and also respect those who have either refound their form or are just hitting their stride right now. And so, in this segment, you're going to see a lot of different players who might surprise you, but also some who seem right. Without further ado, let's jump right into our segment. Starting off the QB position. This one was very difficult to choose between because I could have picked a number of different players. I could have picked the stars, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, even Tua having a decent game. But the one quarterback who impressed me the most is a guy who people have seemed to have forgotten about through no fault of his own, because his offensive philosophies have changed and his system has changed. But in certain moments, and even though it was against a Browns defense that, was kind of packing it in for the season, still an impressive performance that proves that this quarterback still has merit in the fantasy football world. And that is Justin Herbert. 18 of 27, 82 yards, 2 touchdowns, 19.48 fantasy points on the day. This is still an impressive performance. Yes, like I acknowledged, the Browns secondary, is a little bit frustrated, playing with a little bit of unease at the moment. Not necessarily having the opportunity to play with a lead as often as they would like. But this is still a defense that's one of the most revered in the league, and the most respected in the league. And Justin Herbert, this season especially, has not necessarily been required to really pick apart defenses like he did against Cleveland. But in this game, it proves, that yes, Justin Herbert's adjusting to this new offense. When he's given the reins, he is someone who is still very effective for you from a fantasy perspective. He's not the most attractive option out there right now, and I understand that. But you can't just not acknowledge a player anymore, even though he still has the talent to put up good performances. It's just that, it's the Harbaugh system. It's a new look on him. And so, certain games, he's not going to put up these numbers. But you always have to respect a guy who can go out there, no matter the situation, and still perform, even though sometimes he just isn't required to as often. So I wanted to give Justin Herbert his flowers this week, even though I could have picked a numerous amount of talented quarterbacks around the league. Then at the wide receiver position, got to go with my man Garrett Wilson. There really wasn't a true wide receiver performance, maybe outside of, say Flowers, that I was truly impressed by, because Flowers was one of those guys who I was a little bit skeptical about coming into the year and also throughout the season for Baltimore, but he's really proven himself. But Garrett Wilson, this is a guy who a lot of people were selling on after the Devontae Adams trade. But right now, he might just be the X factor, the saving grace of the Jets season. Because I feel like the Jets, their season is over. They still have juice in them to really compete against certain teams. And Garrett Wilson's going to be the reason why. Because The Aaron Rodgers-Davante Adams connection isn't what it once was. But Garrett Wilson is someone who can really elevate his game. Say that, hey, there's a reason why I'm still here, and someone you should want to build around, most importantly, because the future of the Jets now looks a little bit murkier than when initially thought, due to the fact that you don't know if they're going to go down the Aaron Rodgers route or try and invigorate this team with more coaching influence or draft picks. We really don't know. But what I do know is that Garrett Wilson should be the player you build around and not someone who, detracts from the image and outlook of this team in the near future. So Garrett Wilson, impressive performance from him, 9 catches, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a very impressive highlight reel catch, 30 points for him. And keeping me personally in my fantasy football game this week. So kudos to Garrett Wilson for that performance. I expect big and better things from him in the coming weeks. Let's go to the running back position. And this running back that I picked, I kind of have to apologize to a little bit here, because this was a guy who, throughout the season, even before the season, I really did not like from a fantasy perspective. He was someone who I couldn't justify picking very highly in drafts, someone who I couldn't see carrying you week in, week out, especially with the loss of his quarterback early in the season. But when his quarterback came back, we immediately see the effects of what that could do for him in this offense, and it's suddenly looking like Miami Dolphins can actually compete with certain teams, and Devon Achane is going to be a big part of that going forward. 12 carries, 63 yards, 1 touchdown on the ground, 8 catches, 58 yards for the air, 1 touchdown, 32.1 fantasy points for him on the day. And I really like the tenor of this Miami Dolphins offense with Tua leading the helm, because I fear with this offense, especially with Devon Achane, was the fact that things might get too sped up for them. And I feel like Tua was going to be a negative contributor in that regard. But obviously, we didn't see much of Tua early in the season after his injury. And the Dolphins really right now are not in a good spot, and Devon Achane suffered for that. But now with Tua back, you're going to see what can come to fruition for this Dolphins offense. And it's really exciting. Not, hindering anyone's development like I thought it would. And Devon Achane now is bolstered and reinvigorated in the fantasy scene. A lot of people were wondering if, he would have any more upside to him now that, Tua's back and he's going to get a lot more touches in the system. I'm going to tell you that I feel like I have to take everything back that I said about him and say yes, because he's that talented, he's that significant, that impactful for this offense going forward. So I feel like all bets are off on what the Dolphins offense looks like, but all bets are being placed or all in on Devon Achane being a big part of it. Now for the tight end position. And the tight end position this weekend really was a bizarre one, because, like I said, a lot of them right now, whether they're superstars or not, are really congesting the middle tier of what you want out of a fantasy tight end. This guy, I really can't gauge, because he's in a very competitive, high-tempo offense where you never know how many touches you're going to get, how many receptions you're going to get, how many targets you're going to get. And this guy really made the most of Joe Burrow looking his way early and often. Mike Gesicki, 5 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, 27 points. Now, Mike Gesicki, you would think, is one of those guys who isn't necessarily a high-profile fantasy tight end. And in this Bengals offense, it's justified because of the versatility of it, the volatility of it, and because of the fact Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are one of the better wide receiver duos in the league. But Mike Gesicki, the special thing about him is that the Bengals are a team that can either go on the field in a couple of plays or dink and dunk their way down. And when they do, and Joe Burrow is very incisive in the short to intermediate areas of the field, and when he gets to the red zone, that opens up avenues for a guy like Mike Gesicki to have a big game like he did. So, if this continues to happen, look for not only the Bengals to get back into contention, but Mike Gesicki to be someone who you might value a little bit more. Because I feel like the Bengals are an offense meant to wear you down one way or another. And so that kind of plays into Mike Gesicki's hands a little bit because they can play fast and loose or they can take it slow. And that's what I like about Mike Gesicki's value, even in that very much of a logjam in that tight end position right now in fantasy. And then the last player I wanted to acknowledge as well, Darnell Mooney. What a huge fantasy prize this season. A lot of people not expecting his rise on that Falcons roster. But boy, has he proven a lot of people wrong. Not necessarily a lot of people from a fantasy perspective, but perhaps Atlanta Falcons fans weren't expecting someone like him to truly be someone you could rely upon in that offense. But boy, has he proven a lot of people wrong. And so, I just want to acknowledge him. 5 receptions, 88 yards, 1 touchdown, 19.8 fantasy points. As someone who, week in, week out, is always going to be a nice option in that Falcons offense. Now look at this Falcons offense. I feel like it should be a little bit more versatile than it actually is. But when it does let loose, Darnell Mooney is the biggest beneficiary. And so I feel like going forward, he's always going to be a fun option to look into or have on your team. He's not always going to be a starting option, but I feel like he has a lot of value just for what he means to the Falcons offense because they rely on him a lot to add verticality, add savvy to this roster that's not really living up to its standard. And so that's why I feel like Darnell Mooney is a pleasant surprise and deserves his flowers as well as my last fantasy stars of the weekend in the NFL. But let me know what you think in the comments because coming up next, we're transitioning from our NFL fantasy stars to our college football fantasy stars. Gotta love me some college football. And I want to present to you my top guys from this week. We'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it?